thousands and thousands of years, and they plan way ahead, right? These dynasties, whether it's it's the Yin dynasty or even Mao, these are just dynasties, and so they plan like way out. And if you look at the positions of a bunch of those cities, not the ones in Africa, but the ones which I think serve a different purpose, but the ones that are in China, they're out toward Mongolia, and they actually fall just below where the ice line was in the last major ice age that we had. And so, if you were to live in that city, you would be just inside the habitable zone, away from the the ice sheets, which I thought was very interesting. And then the other ones are more inland, but if you look at the notion of the temperature currently increasing, which it is, and the sea level rise, that they would basically be beachfront property. So if you overlay these projections of where there would be glaciers and ice sheets and where the water will rise, if there is, a sea level rise, they've accounted for both. That both of those options are accountable for those cities. So I think they're alternate cities when Shanghai gets flooded, or Shenzhen, or they're going to move the population inland toward these empty cities.
Well, maybe
because the cities are big. They can hold like millions of people. It's not like they're little tiny towns. I mean, they're enormous cities with skyscrapers, and I mean, they're insane.
Yeah, I kind of just wondered, maybe they realize when it might be happening, and or a general idea when it could happen, and what areas might be safe zones and what areas are not going to be where we could live.
They know. They've known since the 50s. And so in the late 50s, there was a meeting, and there was a guy named Roger Revelle who he worked for Scripps Oceanographic Institute. And Revelle had done a major study of the phytoplankton. And, you'll remember back from grade school that we're taught that the phytoplankton are the CO2 scrubbers of the sea, that they get carbon and other stuff in, and they digest it, and they expel oxygen, and they clean the air. They also feed whales and other stuff. And he said that in his study, he said that the phytoplankton were only processing, in 1957, I think, that they were only processing 50% of what we believed that they were processing. And he said that I forget the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of that we were embarking on an experiment the likes of which we could not even imagine the outcome, because even in the late 50s, we were putting so much garbage into the air that the phytoplankton were no longer able to keep up. And so he said in the late 50s, that we had a major problem because of rampant industrialization. And it's only gotten worse since the late 50s.
A lot worse.
So that actually apparently triggered a whole series of events that go until now, where they've been trying to control it.
Now, you like chemtrails and stuff like that, and HAARP and all that stuff, that experimenting. Basically, alternative one was to blow a hole in the upper atmosphere, because they believed they could vent the carbon dioxide into space. And I know it sounds ludicrous, but these are the same guys who thought they could use nuclear bombs to make harbors or a second Suez Canal, through Operation Plowshares. The second alternative was to build bunkers. The third alternative was to leave and go to Mars by way of the moon. And, I throw alternative 1.5 in there, which is chemtrails. There was actually a paper written by Edward Teller, who is the father of the hydrogen bomb. And he wrote an article called Sunscreen for the Planet Earth, where he advocated dumping reflective material into the upper atmosphere to change the reflectivity of the Earth and to cool the Earth. And if you look at the way the temperature's gone, I usually, when I talk about it, I show graphs, but you can see that when this was supposedly done, that the temperature actually has stabilized and decreased some. There are spikes, but the spikes usually map to like Mount Pinatubo exploding or something else happening. But you can actually map it.
Well, that would be that super volcano. If that erupts, that could be the tipping thing for the whole for our whole mankind, for our climate and weather and everything.
Oh yeah, for sure. If something like Krakatoa explodes, or if Yellowstone goes up, or there's supposedly a super volcano that's below Los Angeles. If these things explode, it's like, yeah, we're gonna have a major problem.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have loss of life. It's where they couldn't even help, compound, whatever. And if you survived, I got a funny feeling you might have been better off if you perished, because I mean, if something major goes on, I mean, I don't know. It's scary, and I really think, like you were mentioning, I think they do know something is going on. The chemtrails, they've been doing that, but what I've been reading too, you can only do it so long. And then, then the effect is going to go, well, maybe the opposite way. So, I mean, you can only do it so long.
Well, one of the other things that you see is that there's a rise in Alzheimer's rates and other things because, they're dumping aluminum particles and other things into the upper atmosphere. And so, you've got that kind of aluminum particulate in the air. And it's, I think the Alzheimer's rates are probably increasing due to that because we're inhaling it.
Well, going with about aluminum, but for people to understand, too, my great-grandfather had a company where he made aluminum roasting pans,
right.
And he sold them worldwide. He was really set. And we were using one, to maybe about 2 years ago. And I told my wife, I said, look at my grandmother. She had Alzheimer's. My father had, Alzheimer's and dementia. And then my mom had, was the start before she died of cancer. She actually was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And you know what my mom used to cook on all the time? She used to put roast beef in, that roasting pan, which all that aluminum would leach into the food and you'd eat it.
Yeah, absolutely. But, and it's... a lot of people say, well, you can't prove that chemtrails are real. But I can. If you look at, sorry, smoke, please forgive me. I can't hit the mute button fast enough.
Oh, that's okay. You're lucky I'm not doing it, because I told you before we went on there, I was really sick. That's why I kind of let you do most of the talking, because I'm like, ugh. And I've been coughing, and I hit the mute button so you don't hear it.
No, I'm not that fast. But in the days after 9/11, right, that they grounded all the aircraft in the United States, right, and the only planes that were up were military, like the airborne command center and fighter planes and whatever. And a bunch of scientists went outside and they're like, "Oh my God, we can put balloons up and actually take measurements because there's no planes in the air." And what they found is the temperature actually started rising. And the reason is because the particulate that they're dumping in the upper atmosphere to change the albedo of the Earth wasn't there, at least over the United States, because we grounded all the aircraft. So the temperature started to rise incrementally, and everything got brighter. And one of the things that I tell people is I say, think back when you were a kid. That wasn't everything a lot brighter? Colors were more vivid and everything was a lot brighter. And they go, yeah, it was. Well, that's because they're darkening the Earth to change the reflectivity to keep the temperature under control. And that's actually called global dimming. It's a thing. You can search for it on Google. Global dimming is real.
Oh yeah.
And it's because they're dumping stuff in the atmosphere to change the reflectivity of the Earth to control the temperature to keep it down.
Well, that I do believe. I'll be honest with you. I remember when I was a kid, or not even a kid. I'm going to go back when I was in my 40s even. You go outside during the day, it was bright. It was bright to like 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, during the summer. Now, to me, when you go outside around 3 o'clock, it seems like it's like at 4:30, at least over here in Washington State. So I know there's a dimming. It's not as bright. And, I wish I would have took some type of meter and actually been testing it through the years to see if I could track how much.
People have. They've been testing it for decades, and you can actually see the change and demonstrably show that it's getting darker. It's a real thing, and it's again a response. I know it's not UFOs and stuff, but it kind of ties in that it's a response to the global temperature changes, and whether you think they're man-made or not, the governments around the world think they're man-made, and they're trying to control it. So, they made a series of plans based on it.
No, I'm sure. Look at hurricanes. I mean, they are getting stronger and more of them. And tornadoes, or whatever you pronounce it, getting, more, stronger. And that's only in the last couple of years. It's kind of really scary.
Well, I asked my dad about that because oddly, he lived in Florida for quite some time when he was a kid. And I asked him, I said, you've gone through hurricanes. He goes, sure, I went through a lot of hurricanes. And, he loves when they were seeing the hurricanes on the TV. He always enjoyed like telling the kids, this is what it's like when you're in the eye of a hurricane. You can see the wind swirling around you. You can see bits and pieces of houses going around you and all this crazy stuff. But I asked him, I said, when you were younger, because he was there all the way up until he went to college, when you were there, what kind of category storms were you seeing? And he's like, we'd have a lot of 3s. And he said occasionally we'd get a 4. And if we got a category 4, that was like a big deal. Well, now they're getting multiple category 5s every year. You've got, they've started naming winter storms, because of these, they're basically like hurricanes of snow. It's loony. But he said they always got 3s and 4s. Well, now, and when I was a kid, they were 4s, maybe 5s. Now they're all 5s.
Yeah, well, and if it starts getting, if they come up with a next level, which, like a 6, and that is going to be Earth changes right there.
Yeah, and it's Earth changes. I mean, the Earth is changing. It's changing, whether you think it's a cyclical thing or we had a hand in it. Me personally, I think it's both. Because like you take California, right? California is actually very dry. We were very lucky for a couple of centuries. We had better rain, but over the eons, it's actually a lot of the state is fairly dry, and we're going back into that kind of a weather pattern. And we don't have the infrastructure in place to deal with it because for the foreseeable past, it's been fairly wet. Well, it's actually fairly dry sometimes, and that's the way it is now. Now we have more forest fires, and we have, we have constant water rationing, and
Yeah, and
but again,
that is really hard.
Somebody's somewhere plan for it. Huh?
Yeah, I said that's really hard on people because my daughter lives up in Hemet, California, and I tell you, they got slapped a couple of times with fines, and I tell you, because they have kids, and they would take off and leave their kids around. The kids would turn the water on and run it for an hour or two. All of a sudden, they were in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, one summer a couple of years ago, it was like you can't wash your car. And even to this day, like when I drive around, it's like people don't wash their cars unless they take it to one of the efficient ones, at the gas station. But the days of the 80s when you're out there washing your car in the driveway, that just doesn't happen here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, how can they afford to? Isn't the water